future between Bitcoin and Ethereum on about how to upgrade the protocol and so on. So for this live stream, we have Eli Ben-Sasson, inventor of Starks and CEO of StarkWare. We have Avihu, CPO at StarkWare. We have Dan, general partner at Asymmetric. We have Jeremy Rubin, Bitcoin developer and building Charm Network. And we have Vitalik, co-founder of Bitcoin Magazine, and also creator of Ethereum. Okay, so Eli, maybe we can start with you to explain a bit what those announcements are about and what it means for Starknet.
Yeah, thank you, Abdel. So thank you to all our listeners. Thanks for joining in. So what is our announcement? Bitcoin is based on a few core values and a certain culture that celebrates decentralization, freedom, self-custody. It has a motto that says, in math, we trust. So first of all, we share these values. We're inspired by them. We admire this culture. We have always been a part of it, and we want to contribute to it. Today, Starknet is the only blockchain technology that is both performant and succinctly verifiable. It now has 1,000 plus TPS settling onto Ethereum, and the numbers are increasing. It has the lowest cost per transaction. It has the best security and the best UX. And in math, we trust. It is based on math, on ZK Stark, which I proudly co-invented. It is the scaling standard and the scaling and privacy tech everybody wished they had. I think even Satoshi would agree with that. So in other words, Starknet today offers the most credible path to scaling Bitcoin's value. And what this announcement means is that we, StarkWare, a well-funded 200 plus size team, which shares Bitcoin's values, is putting all of its efforts into making Starknet the first L2 to settle onto both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it will do so in a way that is decentralized, self-custodial, and with Web 2-like UX. That's what this means.
Okay, thank you. So then I want you to talk about your personal history with Bitcoin. But before that, I want to jump briefly on getting first impression from Dan and Vitalik about that. What do you think about that briefly? And what does it mean for you? Maybe Dan, you want to start maybe?
Sure. So look, I mean, Bitcoin and Ethereum are the two largest networks in the crypto ecosystem. They're obviously the two most important. And I think what Ethereum showed is that there's immense activity and interest in DeFi. Decentralized finance is a core pillar of the future part of the economy. And to see the ability for Starknet to tap into both Bitcoin and Ethereum pools of liquidity, I think is really important. The team, I think, is the right team to go build that. Starknet team members are some of the most OG folks in the crypto ecosystem, also pioneering some of the ZK technology. So as an L2, I think it's very well positioned. I think it's really cool to see both Ethereum and Bitcoin working together. So, you know, before I used to be a bit more kind of Bitcoin maxi, and now I kind of see that all this activity that happened in DeFi summer over on Ethereum was truly interesting and inspirational. And so to see that come over to Bitcoin, I think would be a huge unlock for the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's exciting to see Starknet play in this world.
Great. Well, very cool. Vitalik, you want to give maybe your first impression?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value that can come from enabling much easier and more trustless flow of assets between the Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystems. So, you know, including much easier paths for decentralized exchange between in both BTC and ETH, as well as other types of Ethereum assets, as well as potentially other kinds of like DeFi protocols that use both as collateral. And I think in general, one of the topics that I'm passionate about is trying to decentralize the exchange layer of crypto as much as possible, because we just like see over and over again how when that side of things is left decentralization. It just keeps on getting hacked and breaking, and all kinds of things keep happening to it. And so I think we've generally done a good job of advancing decentralized exchanges within a single ecosystem, but between ecosystems, historically, decentralized forms of interoperability have been much weaker. And to me, this is a very big and major step in finally making an inroad on better and decentralized interoperability between two different ecosystems.
Cool. Maybe Jeremy, you want to give your first impression before we move back to Eli?
Yeah, well, I think it's really a positive development. Bitcoin, and obviously I'm somewhat of a Bitcoin maximalist, but maybe a little bit heterodox. Bitcoin commands an enormous monetary advantage over every other decentralized asset that has come into existence since Bitcoin's creation. And I think that while there's been tremendous innovation on the Ethereum community side of things in terms of what you might want to do with assets, I think what we haven't seen is as strong of a development of assets that people might want to hold. And I think that divide has been sort of negative for both sides of the ecosystem. And I think one thing that's really great about being able to bridge or heal that divide is coming back together, bringing in more of the application builders into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And really, at the end of the day, I think all of us have been in the space for a long time. We got into this because of the ability to improve, liberty and freedom for people worldwide, and bringing Bitcoin to, a much bigger distribution in a fully, trustless or trust minimized way, I think is going to be an enormous value unlock, not just for, our bags, but also for society at large.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Elia, can you share a bit about your personal history with Bitcoin, and maybe a bit about StarkWare history with Bitcoin? Because I'm assuming that some people here believe that it's our interest for Bitcoin is new, or it's an opportunistic move, or whatever. So yeah, can you please share a bit about your personal history?
Yeah. So my love and admiration for Bitcoin goes a very long time back. Basically, Bitcoin is what led me on my path from being a mathematician, a professor of theoretical computer science, into becoming a person interested in blockchains. And there was a decisive event. It was in May of 2013 at the Bitcoin conference in San Jose, where a few Bitcoin OGs at the time, Greg Maxwell, Gavin Andreessen, Mike Hearn, gave me the opportunity to present my math. Until then, I was speaking only in academic conferences. And this was the most electrifying conference I ever attended. And thanks to the very warm reception that the Bitcoin OGs of the time, including Greg Maxwell, but also a reporter OG at the time, Vitalik Buterin, and many others, I just felt that this is like, I felt very deep in my heart that there's something that, well, it's like falling in love. And this is really what started my trajectory from writing math papers to becoming interested in contributing in Bitcoin. Along the path, I co-authored the Zero Cash paper and then co-founded Zcash. The Zero Cash paper also, its title is, scaling, something about like Bitcoin with privacy. So it all goes back to Bitcoin. And a very interesting thing is that in that talk, which is still recorded and you can watch it, one of the things I said is that today, when a new Bitcoin node fires up, it has to download and check and verify every block from the Genesis block, and this takes a very long time. So even in 2013, it took a very long time. Now it takes longer. And then I said, with this technology, which back then I said should be ready by the end of the summer, right? I was speaking in the spring of 2013. And I mean, a theoretician never trusts them for making any predictions on code delivery. Anyways, I said very soon, when you will fire up a new Bitcoin node, you can verify the whole blockchain history in a matter of seconds on your smartphone. And the very nice thing is that thanks to the efforts of Abdel and many others, the Rato project, which is coming into life based on on ZK Starks. This is now soon going to be a reality. You will be able to verify using ZK Starks the full Bitcoin blockchain in a matter of seconds on a smartphone. So what happened was that Bitcoin is what led me on this trajectory towards taking my ZK technology and bringing it to blockchain. And ZK Starks, we always wanted to deploy it also on Bitcoin. And now for the very first time, we believe there's some inkling of a chance that this may happen. So we want to do all of our best effort to make it happen, to put Stark scaling onto Bitcoin, in addition to expanding and extending and keep on scaling Ethereum.
Nice. Okay, now let's go more into the weeds and talk a bit about the how, the path to make this happen. Avihu, can you share a bit about the path and explain also maybe the differences between today's announcement and also the stuff that we mentioned before, because people might think, okay, we already said that we want to scale Bitcoin as well and so on, but what is new today?
Yeah. Hi. So the path to Starknet on Bitcoin is something that we are starting today. We are not waiting anymore for potential future changes or soft forks, but instead we are just going to start the path of bringing Starknet to Bitcoin today. It's going to be an involvement of that will start from a multisig, where very, very soon we will have both BTC, Bitcoin, and some other Bitcoin assets bridges. So you will be able to take your Bitcoin or take your runes or ordinals or anything else and bring them into Starknet. And this will be done in phases and in collaboration with some best-in-class partners. I can't tell more about this right now, but it will be coming in the next few weeks. This is the very basic. Multisig is like the first level. And then on top of that, we are investing resources already today in doing some research and pushing the tech of BitVM, which is a fairly new solution. It's been around the block for, I would say, less than a year. That's at least my feeling. And there is a lot of work there still to be done, but the plan is to build it directly to work with Starknet. We are going to work with some great partners there. We have many ideas on how to improve it. I'm sure it will not end up being the form that exists, exactly the form that exists today. And it needs to be worked directly on top of Starknet. So that's the plan there. In addition, we're exploring some other solutions in the space, some that can be done without soft fork and that potentially has some better trade-offs than BitVM. And maybe I will elaborate on this later. And obviously the last thing that some people are expecting. So for now, we are also POCing with CAT, and we are doing it on two fronts. One is we are doing POCs on how to build smart contracts and bridges on Bitcoin. And the second thing is that we are going to add to POC with Stark verification. We already demonstrated some of those. Right now we're doing this on Signet. We are thinking on about deploying it potentially on some real value networks that can have CAT enabled, but we haven't finalized any plans there yet.
Great, that's cool. Maybe you can continue a bit and expand on something that a lot of people are asking about, which is the multi-settlement. What does it mean? What are the challenges and so on? And maybe also I'm curious to know if Vitalik, you already thought about the topic, how can a rollup could maybe settle on two different settlement layers and the implications and so on. So yeah, maybe you can start with our current general ideas. Yeah,
I'll start by saying that settling on both layers, sometimes we call it L2 square. It's a one solution that we are researching. There are obviously trade-offs when we compare it to other solutions. But for now, I want to focus just on this solution and explain what that is, why do we want it, and how does it work. So what that is, today, when Starknet settles on Ethereum, it basically have a single finality. You look at this on Ethereum, this is the finality that Starknet has. On L2 Square, what we offer is to have dual finality, where you make sure that Starknet has the latest or one late state that is similar on both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and only with this dual finality you can exit. I will explain both of these more on this in a minute. That means the deposits of assets can come now from both Bitcoin and Ethereum, but exit is based on the dual finality of both networks. Why do we want such a new construction? Well, for the degens of the world, I think they would potentially survive with something a bit lower in terms of trust assumptions, but for maxis from both sides that potentially are more interested in Bitcoin or are more interested in Ethereum and aren't necessarily trusting right now the other side or the other assets in the other chain, they can still use this construction. They can still exit the chain just based on their own beliefs. They say, I only trust Bitcoin. They can, at any case, go out of the chain with all the Bitcoin assets in some conditions. And on the other hand, they can use now things that they couldn't do before. Most extreme, they can use composability with assets on the other network. So they can, for example, atomically start with Bitcoin assets, do things, end up with Bitcoin assets, and they are without risk, utilizing assets and liquidity on a different chain. And they also will have better UX if they are deciding to interact with assets on the other chain. So they can go ahead and interact with the same infrastructure, with the same network, on assets on a different network, and at the end of the day, stay on Starknet and just go back to be exposed just to assets from one network. I'm not going to get too much into the how. I will just say it in 1 minute. So we have, in order to achieve that, we need to have some assumptions that are on top of what we assume today on Starknet. One of them is that we need to assume some sort of finality of the L1. That means that after some time, let's say an hour, we assume that there will be no more deep reorg in the L1. If you have this assumption, then we can use Starknet to prove the execution of each L1, Ethereum and Bitcoin. And that means that Starknet proof can now attest to Bitcoin state on Ethereum and to Ethereum state on Bitcoin. And that means that they can attest to the latest state of Starknet on each chain. And without getting too much into how this protocol would work, basically Starknet will have dual finality on each chain. And to progress to the next state, the Starknet will need to show that on each chain, there is a same state before it moves to the next one. So every time it will introduce a state to Ethereum, a state to Bitcoin, and those states will be either expiring after some time, or if Starknet shows the same state, then they will be approved as the final dual state and users will be able to exit from them. It's very short, not too detailed. We will have a blog post coming that will put it in way more details, but if in the meantime you hear that and you want to get involved, you think you have hard questions or ideas on why it wouldn't work or how to improve it, feel free to contact us, contact me, tag me, and we'll move forward from there.
Okay, thank you. Vitalik, do you have some thoughts about the multi-settlement thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting technical problem of like how closely you can approximate like simultaneously being a roll up on two different chains, right? Because the challenge is that if you're a roll up on one chain, then your fork choice rule is like defined as being dependent on the fork choice rule of the thing that you're settling onto, right? And so like you have some gadget that's on Ethereum, and then that gadget on Ethereum is going to like track what the blocks that are on your chain, and that's going to be dependent on what happens on Ethereum, right? But then like within the context of settling onto one chain, that all works fine. But the challenge is that if one chain ends up reverting, like basically no matter how far Ethereum reverts, like everything is fine. because your chain will also revert along with Ethereum, right? With two chains, like the tricky question basically is that basically, you have Ethereum and then you have Bitcoin, and it's like if Ethereum reverts, then like you would want your chain to revert along with Ethereum, but then if Bitcoin reverts, you'd want the chain to revert along with Bitcoin, and like the two views that you're following like could potentially risk diverging, right? It's like, if Ethereum gets to block X, and then the chain committing to Bitcoin also accepts block X, but then Ethereum reverts that, but Bitcoin doesn't, then like you run into a problem, right? And generally, like the standard approach for trying to mitigate this sort of thing is to just have long deposit periods, right? And you just say, on the Ethereum side, like, you don't accept an Ethereum block until it finalizes. On the Bitcoin side, you don't accept something until, I don't know what your window is, like could be 2 days, 7 days, like some number, right? And like you could, like, I've always had the theory that like Bitcoin also has a finality window, right? Because like if 51% attack miners actually try reverting like 2 weeks, realistically, the community is just going to like soft fork them and like declare their blocks invalid and force them to screw off, right? So I think like 7 days roughly is final. But it's still like, it's kind of more subjective, and there's this balance between like basically like time and capital efficiency versus how safe the whole thing is, right? But I mean, I'm sure that you guys have chosen the parameters pretty conservatively, and so the thing will like actually end up running just fine. But I mean, it's definitely going to be a really interesting experiment to show. I mean, I think realistically, like Bitcoin and Ethereum are probably the two like most sturdy and stable systems to actually run this this kind of thing on top of. And so, if it succeeds here, then like we'll see how that goes from there.
Yeah. I would say more than go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say generally, there are these in the Wall Street world, there are these like structured notes that are like a worst of basket, and when you inherit multiple chains, like you kind of get that sort of behavior. So I think a 2-chain setup is definitely solvable. But if you were to go to like 100 chains, then you'd be getting, okay, well, like what's the, which one of these 100 chains is going to fail? And then everything starts unwinding around that. So it's something where I think for, for two heavily decentralized, robust projects, I think it really makes sense to be able to go to that. But it's something that, and I know you guys wouldn't do it, but if there was like a competitor that was like, oh, we're going to add 100 chains, I would start having some pretty, serious questions about that. The only other thing I'd like to add, and maybe it's a little bit early for giving more detail, but we're working on some technology that's really going to help with narrowing that Bitcoin finality window, so that projects like StarkWare will be able to not have to wait like 2 weeks before being able to honor a deposit.
Nice. Okay. When can we learn more about this?
We'll be putting more out probably around May.
Okay, that's cool. Okay. Now, Eli, I have a hard question for you. Are we leaving Ethereum? Please be honest. I will use the please be honest meme.
Yeah. Do you want the short answer or the long answer?
Both, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
The short answer is no. The long answer is no. Let me explain. The two most credible decentralized blockchains today are Bitcoin and Ethereum. They are the ones that adhere in the greatest sense to the values of decentralization, freedom, and security. And they each one of them contributes immensely to humanity, really. And we are already deployed on Ethereum. Very proud of that. We're not going, to leave it, period. We would very much like to deploy as securely as possible our technology onto Bitcoin. And now that we see that there is a chance of that happening, we do need some soft fork like Opcat in order to allow that. Otherwise, we'll do whatever we can, but I fear it won't be as secure. So all we're doing is expanding. That's the very, very long answer. But no, we are not leaving Ethereum. Hell no.
Okay, very cool. Now I want us to reflect and think maybe about use cases, actually. So I will ask maybe like starting with Dan, what kind of use cases do you think are generally missing or on Bitcoin or could be improved? And maybe then we can think whether or not Starknet on Bitcoin could provide an answer to those missing use cases to improve them.
Yeah, due to Bitcoin's very primitive and limited scripting capabilities on L1, there's not a lot of DeFi activities that you can do. So in order to do those, you need to use a Bitcoin L2. Starknet, providing this for Bitcoin users unlocks a whole host of different DeFi activities that we've seen flourish in other places like Solana and Ethereum. So this includes yield farming, lending, borrowing, staking. All of these new use cases are unlocked for Bitcoin users. And I think a lot of people ask, do Bitcoin people actually want these things, or are they a bunch of maxis who just hodl? So look, there's if you look at the statistics, 87% of Bitcoin owners hold another crypto asset, and a lot of them transact in and out of different chains, and they're not just all hanging out at Bitcoin all the time. So, I think there's a huge kind of moderate group here that wants to utilize DeFi activity and make their Bitcoin assets productive. There's nothing wrong with hodling. Hodling is a great way to store wealth over time. But if you want to lend it out and earn a yield on it, or if you want to borrow against it, these are very basic financial primitives that a lot of Bitcoiners, even if they are more maxi, I think would still like to tap into, especially borrowing against their Bitcoin, using it as collateral. A lot of folks are doing that in a CeFi way right now. Like, for example, Unchained Capital is a really popular service where Bitcoiners are borrowing dollars using their Bitcoin as collateral, but it's done in a completely centralized fashion. So L2s like Starknet can unlock that activity. And I think that's, for example, probably the biggest DApp or biggest utilization that we can unlock there. There's some other really cool things too, like all sorts of ways to hedge and other more complex financial instruments that can be unlocked by having an L2 on Bitcoin. So, for me, it kind of like, if we think about, Bitcoin's L1 is very basic, simple, and it works, and we want to keep it somewhat simple. These L2s are kind of like these gardens that allow you to do whatever you'd like in. So I think there's a ton of demand for Bitcoin L2s. In my fund, Asymmetric, we invest in Bitcoin DeFi. So we obviously believe in the category as a whole. And Starknet's team is legendary with a bunch of OGs where, I think this is one of the top teams in this space to go do something like this.
Awesome, cool. Jeremy, do you have some takes on missing use cases for you? What kind of use cases could be interesting to unlock with layer 2 that is scalable on top of Bitcoin?
Well, so I think that one thing that I'd point out is the surface has just really only barely been scratched with BitVM. And what I've noticed is that the BitVM community has gotten really, really, really excited about bridging. And obviously bridging is a very good primitive. It's also like a monetizable primitive. So that's where I think that there's been an influx of investment. But the general technique of being able to publish fraud proofs and adjudicate them on Bitcoin is a really big deal. And I think that that's something that even outside of BitVM, a lot of applications and protocols can use that in a bunch of different contexts. Certainly it's something that we look at that we're pretty excited about, of where there's applications. I wrote up a paper recently called unFE'd covenants. And it's a concept that for covenant emulation, you can use a BitVM like fraud proof gadget to enforce that a signing federation follows a particular set of rules. And there are things like that I think are going to be very interesting. And that's something that I would expect to see, if Bitcoin is a robust settlement layer for these fraud proofs, that we might see more protocols using Bitcoin as a fraud proof layer, as well as the inverse happening, which is Bitcoin using more expressive layers for fraud proofs inside of their own protocols on Bitcoin main chain. So that's something that I think is like a pretty exciting, I would call it maybe a 2025, 2026 trend that I think we'll see more applications using BitVM fraud proofs for other applications.
Cool. Avihu, what do you think in terms of use cases? What can Starknet bring to Bitcoin in terms of use cases? Is there missing use cases or use cases that can be improved?
Yeah, I think one thing that became a bit more close to my heart, but I think it's also related and resonate with many Bitcoiners, is that very often use the phrase "be your own bank." Personally, like, no offense to my bank, I hope I can be a better bank than my own bank. But at the same time, this infrastructure is like, today, many Bitcoiners are using Bitcoin for store value. So they use it, the storage option of the bank, but they don't really use it for anything else that they do with their bank or money. And I think what this technology can enable, what Starknet can enable, will improve this payment infrastructure or be our own bank infrastructure quite a lot, both in terms of like things like privacy, maybe we can touch more in that later, and also in things like smart wallets. And by that, I mean, even if you would have 1 billion users and you will be able to support them, or maybe looking at it the other way around, if you want to get 1 billion users that actually use the chain, you can't have just primitive wallets, or you don't want to offload everything to custodian services. You want everything, like spending limits, Face ID signing, credit cards integration, as much as you can be integrated directly, trustlessly, as much as possible. And I think that's part of what we bring.
Yeah.
Okay,
if I can add another one, something I'd be really excited to see built out would be a Bitcoin mining pool in StarkWare. It's a major point of centralization in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think decentralized mining pools, there's a couple implementations. They really do need covenants in order for them to exist on Bitcoin. But even then, they're still pretty difficult to build a good one. But that could be a really major application, especially given like being able to have like faster latency and more scalability, number of users. I could see a decentralized mining pool being a really killer application for a Bitcoin rollup.
Nice, very cool idea actually. I see that Nethermind is liking the idea, so maybe you want to build it, so you can maybe think about it.
Yeah. Shoot me a DM.
Yeah. Vitalik, maybe I'm curious about you, like where you were still actively working on Bitcoin and so on. What kind of use cases you were thinking that would be missing and that a rollup could bring on Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, I think one just like very simple one is payments, right? Like if you go back to the white paper, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and I mean, obviously, the L1 is not nearly scalable enough for that. And then I think we've also seen some of the limits of the Lightning Network and that kind of approach. I mean, we've seen even. Ethereum L2's existing ones obviously have their own problems, and definitely a big shout out to Starknet for getting their like very high TPS ZK proven. And then at the same time, I think there's among many parts of the ecosystem this desire to gravitate toward more centralized solutions. And I think if we can have like an actual proper layer 2 that like actually satisfies all of the needed security properties, then like we can actually make crypto payments great again, and we can actually make all of those use cases work.
Yeah, cool. I have a follow-up question for you, Vitalik. I was looking through your articles on Bitcoin Magazine, one from 2012 about the opportunity to target teenagers for Bitcoin adoption. And back in the day, you mentioned few elements that will be interesting to target teenagers. You said that they want internet purchasing power, that Bitcoin teaches them good financial wisdom. Bitcoin allows teenagers financial privacy, just as cash does. And also that Bitcoin encourages teen entrepreneurship, and that teenagers are the future. And for me, it was striking because I think it's true. All you said is true, but for some reason, after more than 12 years, we still are not getting there. So I'm curious to know your opinion about, do you still believe it's a real opportunity for Bitcoin adoption? And why did we fail to tackle this opportunity?
I mean, I think like crypto in general has not had the like higher levels of adoption that it has for like basically two reasons, right? And like one is applications, and two is just like technical restrictions and like inability to meet the like even the kinds of applications where it had some level of traction. And I mean, I think on that second one, there's been a huge amount of progress in technology over the last couple of years. I mean, I do think that like the world has moved forward, and people are not going to be impressed by payments the same way that people have been 10 years ago, right? Like, I think 10 years ago, there was this interesting phenomenon I remember where, especially when like institutional and governments type of actors would get excited about blockchainization, the thing they were actually excited about is digitization. And like blockchains were often, the first digital thing that they saw. But these days, like digitization is already a given, right? And so you can't go and convince people to use blockchains by telling them that paper is stupid, right? Like you have to actually give them an advantage that's specific to blockchains. And I think that applies to institutions and that applies to people as well, right? Like 10 years ago, cash was still the most popular default payment method. And you could actually say like, wow, this is amazing. This is internet money and it's like really powerful, right? And now the centralized internet money world has made quite a few steps forward, and we have to recognize that, and we have to offer something from the decentralized internet money side that can like actually compete and that can actually offer like an interesting and compelling 10x leap on top of that. And like what that is, like I don't think there is one very clear and obvious answer, right? And I think like the answer to that basically is the same as the answer to the question of like what the applications need to be, right? There's a lot of different categories, a lot of ways to use money, a lot of different kinds of applications that can be built, a lot of different things that could be done with DAOs, a lot of like different things that could be done with DeFi or smart contract contraptions or with AI. And like these are, I think, the things that the ecosystems I really needs to be focused on right now.
Cool. Now I want us to talk about Bitcoin upgrades, soft forks, and a bit of research. So it's a very sensitive topic, very important topic. So first I want us to talk about potentially OpCat, even if, as we said, we have a path that don't depend on OpCat for the first steps, at least. If we want to be a full validity rollup, we will need some efficient stock verification, but the first steps don't require that. But still, I want us to talk about OpCat a bit, and then and it's good because we have Jeremy to talk about other forms of governance, the different candidates for other soft forks proposal, and so on. So maybe Avihu, you can start by talking a bit about OpCat, what it brings on the table, and why we need that for the end game.
Okay. I'll try to be short. I mean, you should, if you don't know exactly what OpCat is, there is right now tons of information. You should go ahead and read or watch. I'll just say very succinctly what OpCat brings from our perspective that we need are mainly two things. One, it brings to Bitcoin a strong form of covenant, meaning today, it's very hard / impossible to get on Bitcoin a script that is persistent, meaning that you can spend but still make sure that you spend to the same script, that also has the ability to pass on some sort of like dynamic state, what we call on the Ethereum space smart contracts, right? So without OpCat, we don't have this capability today. We don't have this form of strong covenant. We don't have persistency of code. We don't have dynamic state that we can pass on. With OpCat, there is a magic that we can do, and then suddenly we have some sort of smart contracts directly on Bitcoin transactions. And we need that. I will explain in a second with an example. The other thing is that Opcat brings efficient hashing for arbitrary computation. And without getting too much into the details, it means that now with Opcat, or not now, when Opcat will be enabled, when and if, we will be able to do the hashing operation on multiple elements in a very efficient way. Just to give the very basic example, if you do today op SHA-256, you can do it on a single element. In Bitcoin, it costs you 1 unit. If you do SHA-256 today on multiple elements on Bitcoin with something that we call small script, you can do it. You can do it on multiple elements. It's going to cost you roughly 300K units. So the efficiency improvements is insane. And I'm not talking particularly on Starknet on Bitcoin, but for anything that involves cryptography, for anything that involves smart contract logic, you'd need those things. And CAT is bringing them in a very, I would say, comparable, very straightforward way. Do I have time to get into an example or not, Abdel?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention like one thing, that not necessarily an L2, even though it will be more efficient that way. But if you want to enable, for example, privacy and private payments on Bitcoin, then a very clean way to do it is that you can, using CAT, build a smart contract, and you can, using CAT, verify Stark proofs. So what you can do is you can build a smart contract that receives transparent deposits in BTC on top of Bitcoin L1. And from that moment on, you pass the value inside the smart contract using proofs. So if you have smart contract, you have Stark verification, you can build on top of that privacy payment contract. So that's just one simple example that is missing today on Bitcoin L1 as a primitive that we believe that you will be able to achieve with Opcat. Maybe it will be still not the most efficient or still a bit expensive, but it's already there.
Okay, great. So before we get Jeremy to talk about other forms of governance, I'm curious, Dan, if you can give your take about, generally speaking, the culture of changes on Bitcoin, your take on ossification and so on.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Bitcoin, I think when you look at the the block size wars and you look at what the compromise was made amongst the small blockers is the idea that Bitcoin would scale in layers, right? But the unfortunate part is that a lot of the Bitcoin L2s don't have the connectivity to Bitcoin L1 in a way that we find trustless or trust minimized to a degree that I think we would all appreciate and want. So I feel that OPCAT or other software proposals that improve the connectivity and improve the trust assumptions that these Bitcoin L2s have, I think that is ultimately honoring the original social consensus around the block size wars of that the L2s are the way that Bitcoin will scale. And we need to ensure that if we're going to push all this economic activity to L2s, that these L2s should be as secure as possible. So I think things like OPCAT and others are really important in terms of we need to have these implemented at some point. There's also some minor things as well, including like some potential bugs in the future or to improve Bitcoin's quantum resistance, et cetera, that we'll need to have that conversation sooner than later. So I don't think any of Bitcoin's core parameters are going to change. Proof of work is not going to change. The monetary policy won't change, but I do believe that there are some scripting capabilities and some other things that are useful for us to discuss and bring up. And I think Starknet and Tapper Wizards are two companies really pushing the envelope forward in terms of the conversation around OPCAT.
Cool, thank you. So Jeremy, can you talk a bit about other form of governance and your feeling about what should be the next soft fork and so on? And maybe also, first of all, I wanted to say that I'm glad that you came back full force on discussing that. I know it was draining for you in the past and you lost a lot of energy and so on this. So I'm glad that you are back on this. Curious about your opinion.
Yeah. So I think I want to say it pretty unequivocally. I'm for the next thing. So whatever the next thing is, I'm pretty for it. I think that the Bitcoin community ultimately is very technically conservative. And when you work in the Bitcoin space as a developer, you have to wear both hats of your personal desire and also what you think the community will largely accept and what you think is mature enough to go into Bitcoin. A couple of years ago, while I like Opcat, I felt less confident. I'm one of, at the time, very few developers who are actually implementing complex scripts. And the tooling around that is really hard to work with. And so when I was thinking about, okay, well, how would I write contracts using Opcat? It was like, all right, well, first I'm going to have to write a compiler. And then how am I even going to analyze these scripts? How am I going to satisfy them? And I didn't really feel that we were on a trajectory for Opcat being reasonable. I think that situation is getting better over time, partly, thanks to you guys as well. But there's still a lot of questions that I have around if Opcat is ready for prime time. An example of that being in the proposed Opcat implementation, it's limited to 520 bytes, which means that transaction sizes that you'd be operating over are also limited in some way, shape, or form. And that might be something that as a tooling developer, you then have to add lots of additional checks of like, okay, anytime I'm operating over a transaction and I'm expanding the outputs to inspect them, is any one of them able to be set by a third party to be over 520 bytes? And if that does happen, then does my program fail? Does it become anyone can spend? Am I able to rule out that somebody has added an output that would trigger a transaction that will go over 520 bytes 5 steps before the transaction that happens? And then do I get into a stuck state? So there's all of these really complicated things when you make these engineering decisions around like a 520 byte cutoff, for example. And I don't want to be in the category of making FUD because probably you can make secure things. I think people might just be underestimating how difficult it is to write scripts that you're actually able to analyze and prove correct. And what I've seen happen over the last couple of years is more tools coming out. And when you have tools, you can automate, improve some of these things. But when you're writing scripts by hand, which I think is what a lot of it had been happening until maybe the last year, I'm very skeptical that every property is actually checked that is required to write a secure contract. And in Bitcoin, we only want to introduce primitives that we're confident people are going to be able to use correctly. So I'm just setting the stage a little bit for, for how people might be thinking about what we introduce. There's another separate couple of questions around what happens in use case land and if that's good or bad for Bitcoin. I authored a proposal in 2019 called Check Template Verify. At the time it was called something else, but that's the name that eventually was landed on. And really all it is a replacement for pre-signed transactions. So when you know specifically the exact next transaction that you want at the time of creating a spend, you can specify some set of future expansion, state transitions, options for where a coin might flow. And it turns out that covers maybe like 90% of interesting things people were doing with Bitcoin at the time. Creating a Lightning channel, what you do is you first pre-sign a couple transactions, and then you create an address, you send to that address. Oh, well, turns out if you can pre-specify them, you can get rid of interactivity, and now you can withdraw from Coinbase into a Lightning channel directly. Oh, we want to have a vault for, let's say Blockstream Liquid. It turns out that you have to roll these outputs every, month because they have a time lock that expires. And if you want to have a triggered time lock, you need a pre-signed transaction, and then you need to store that somewhere. Turns out you can also use CTV to get rid of the pre-signed transaction. So it's just really fit for a lot of the applications that were actually deployed, makes them better, and also works with other things that people might want to do. Just a simple state transition rule. And then the other one that I want to highlight is CheckSig from Stack, which is just signing a signature without transaction context and being able to validate it. It's really useful. For example, in BitVM, right now you use a trick that I came up with to sign Lamport signatures over a piece of data in order to do a computation over it. It's very inefficient, very large, and CheckSig from Stack would let you directly sign like an integer or something and be able to pass that into your function for verification. So a lot of these things are like really not super complicated what they do, but sometimes the complexity can be deceptive. Like CAT is very simple, but it lets you do a lot of things. These two primitives are very restricted, so there's a limited amount of surprise that we're probably going to see with what you can do with them. And I think as a roadmap, maybe for improving Bitcoin, we would see something like that get shipped, and then a maybe year to 2 year process to ask, is it just opcat that we want, or would it really be a lot better if we had 64-bit or 128-bit integers as well to be able to do our mathematical operations on? And I think if you talk to anybody who's working on BitVM, they'd go, actually an adder would be like, a arbitrary precision addition would be like much better for us than cat, because you can use it to make cat, but then using cat to make addition is kind of a little bit fraught. And that's where, maybe tooling does the translation. I think that given a perspective where maturing the tooling using cat is still going to take multiple years, it may make sense to just directly make the primitives that are going to make the system work without needing additional layers of tooling. And I think this has been a debate in the more expressive side of things with some of the languages, like Solidity, for example, being compiled and requiring layers of tooling for analysis, or for languages like Clarity, for example, I believe are more directly interpreted inside of the script. So as you get things that require more tooling, it's harder to verify the functionality. As you get closer to, what you see is what you get, you can, more easily audit the semantic of any of these contracts and ensure that you're writing something secure. And I think that's a trade-off space. What I would like to see happen is these advancements for CTV and check-sig from stack to go in, within the next year. I think it's doable. I think it is a really big value unlock for a wide variety of applications and use cases. I don't think it's the end of the story. I think as a community, we can come together and actually evaluate a set of primitives and constraints. Stephen Bruce is a developer who's kind of leading an effort around this right now, and then come up with a more coherent upgrade package that's going to enable these, wider layer 2 functionalities without loading in a massive amount of technical debt that we'll deal with for a very long time.
Very cool. Just one compliment to what you said. I very much agree that Opcat can open very large design space and so on, and that Bitcoin script itself is very error prone, and it's hard to make secure code. So one thing we like to say about the idea of scaling through a rollup is that you can focus on making one very strong and secure smart contract for the proof verification. You do a bunch of audits and so on, and then you do the execution off chain, and you use this single very audited and secure smart contract, and you use more expressive languages like Cairo or Rust that are less error prone and where it's easier to get a sense of safety and security. So it makes sense.
I think the market will demand that anyways, if only for reasons of latency. So whether or not it's a rollup like architecture or Arc or Lightning, Bitcoin's latency is problematic for a variety of applications.
A lot of use cases.
And so we'll see things moving to layer 2s on very tightly secured primitives as just a market force anyways.
Yeah, right. Vitalik, maybe you can share your take on the culture of changes on Bitcoin, because of course on Ethereum it's very different. You have like those regular hard forks and so on. You wrote recently about the block size war. Can you maybe give this as a case study? What are your takes on that, and what would you maybe like not necessarily recommend, but what is your current opinion on the culture of changes on Bitcoin?
I think so. One thing that's interesting in Ethereum is that like different parts of the protocol have different levels of immutability, right? Like people would be much more comfortable with like completely replacing how the proof of stake mechanism works than they would with like making big changes to the EVM, right? Which like actually makes sense, because breaking like making big changes to the EVM was like breaks many more applications, whereas the consensus layer is like relatively insulated from the applications. And I think as we've seen, in Bitcoin, it's very similar, right? There's different parts of the protocol that have different like levels of like perception in the community of how enshrined they are or how unchangeable they are, right? And like within Ethereum, these kinds of like boring technical changes tend to be fairly easy or or they tend to not really get much community resistance, right? Whereas the things that do get community resistance are like some of these much bigger things that have to do with like protocol decentralization, right? And in this case, it's been like interesting. So from that perspective, right, it's like very understandable how the whole block size issue, like it took a long time and it aroused a lot of emotions and so on. And I'm honestly kind of surprised that OPCAT has been taking so long, though. I mean, at the same time, I guess I have kind of made the argument myself a few years ago for why like the risky thing isn't actually like the complexity of the protocol change, but rather the complexity of like the change in structure to the ecosystem that something like it implies. Is Bitcoin going to like start having NEV issues once like the ordering of like L2 commitments starts actually being really economically relevant to people? And I don't know. So it's interesting to observe. I definitely hope that the debate keeps proceeding smoothly and he can get to a resolution pretty soon.
Amazing. Before we move on, I want to do a quick time check. Who can maybe like extend by 50 minutes?
I have to go right now. So.
You have to go. Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, you can extend?
Yeah, I can extend.
Dan as well? Okay. So maybe if you have to go, maybe one last question, Vitalik, before you jump. Would you still consider yourself as a Bitcoiner?
I mean, I still hold Bitcoins, and so yeah, absolutely.
I will take that for a yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So are you in favor of CTV plus Chexer from Stack?
That's a yes. Okay.
All right,
see you guys.
Let's go.
Thank you, Vitalik. Bye.
Bye.
Amazing. I will definitely take this for a yes, and I'm happy. Okay, sounds good. I am glad that you can extend because I have a very important section that I wanted to cover. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have Vitalik opinion on that, but it doesn't matter. We can do without him. Before this next section, maybe Avihu, can you talk a bit about the Collider script research?
And I also suggested at some point we answer some. There are a lot of comments, and a lot of them are, I think, love notes to Vitalik, who's just left, but we all love him.
Yeah.
But maybe, there are some questions. If you want to post questions as opposed to love notes, maybe we can.
Can we do that? Maybe
I'm just seeing these. Yeah.
Can someone take like the interesting questions?
Well, they have to. I don't know how to use it here, but I'm saying if people will now post questions in the comments, so we can.
You want to do that now or at the end?
No. I'm saying if now, first of all of the love letters, now that Vitalik is left, we can, slack down that.
Okay.
And just post questions on the comments, and then we can answer them shortly.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah, people in the chat, you can start asking serious questions, and we will try to take some of them. But yeah, okay, Avihu, it's your turn to maybe nerd snipe a bit with the Collider script work.
I will just mention it. I don't want to get into it at all. I will just say that so Collider script is a paper that we wrote together with Ethan Ellman, Victor Kolobo from StarkWare, and Andrew Polstra and myself. And it's just really cool construction that enables real covenant on Bitcoin today. The only issue is that it's like super expensive, millions of dollars per covenant. So it's not really practical. But it is very cool. I do recommend reading it. We are working on a new idea that we call for now Collider VM. It is different from Collider script, but is inspired by it. It's in fact inspired by Collider script and by BitVM. I can't say too much more about it right now, but we do plan to publish it soon. It's way more practical than Collider script, and it has trade-offs, but some of the trade-offs end up being better than BitVM. It doesn't require soft fork, and it is not fraud-proof based. So yeah, that one will come in a few weeks' time.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, now I want to talk a bit about some kind of comparisons between Ethereum and Bitcoin, and also to think about what makes a good settlement layer and why we think that Bitcoin and Ethereum are very special. And for me, I have a even more drastic opinion than Eli that said they are the most credible attempts. For me, they are the only credible attempts, and everything else is bullshit in the crypto industry. And I will explain a bit what I mean. It depends on what is your North Star, but for me, the North Star is to be able to resist to globally coordinated nation-state attacks. And if this is the target, then only Bitcoin and Ethereum are credible attempts. And even for them, they are not there yet. So not even talking about all the alt layer ones. But we differ slightly, Eli and I, on that. But at the very least, we can all say that they are the most credible attempts. So I will ask you.
I agree that they're the most credible. Yes. I mean, the reason I'm not saying they're the only ones, because I actually think that there are many serious teams that have very, very good intentions and are making credible attempts to reach that. The thing is that what you also need is a very, very big network of operators. And then you need to be like a shilling point and have a network effect. And I'm not blaming the various founders of some of these other credible attempts that they have not yet succeeded in doing
And to be clear, I'm not saying that they're not credible, necessarily because they have bad intentions, but good intentions are not sufficient. Right now, the conditions where you launch, you bootstrap the ecosystem and so on, they are naturally captured from day one to be credible attempts to be a strong settlement layer. That's what I mean. It's not that everyone is evil and have bad intentions. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe one analogy for it is there's a lot of placebos, and I think that there are products that by appearance you can't particularly tell the difference between them and the real deal. And if you're not sick, then you're really not going to notice the difference.
Yes.
And I guess the question is, I think in Bitcoin's history, we've not necessarily seen a great sickness happen in some of the strongest markets. We've definitely seen it in smaller countries where they've had currency collapses and they've had a flight to crypto. But we've not seen the US collapse or Japan collapse or any other world leader. And I think that's did we lose everyone else?
Yeah. What happened to the layout?
I don't know, but I think that's
I can still hear you.
That's one of these defining things is we don't know when we're actually going to have the event that will be a differentiator for Bitcoin and Ethereum over other protocols. And until that, these other things seem to be functioning just as good.
Yeah, very good analogy. Actually, it's a very good way to say it. And it's true that in a lot of countries, people don't see the real need, and they are in the comfort zone, and for them, everything is working normally, and they don't realize the huge gap there is between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the rest. Okay, so maybe the first question is, what do you think are the most important properties for a good settlement layer to consider building roll-ups or generally layer 2s on top of it? Yeah, who wants to start? Okay, I will nominate Dan, maybe.
I think Jeremy or Ellie and Jeremy, I think, are a little bit more qualified to opine on some of the technical details there. So I'll hand it over to them.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Jeremy, Ellie, who wants to tackle it?
I nominate Jeremy.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, so I think that when I think about Bitcoin generally, and I think maybe we can, we know when we see it, we'd all agree that Bitcoin has some set of good properties. Is I think about archways, and I think that there are in this archway of building Bitcoin, there are 4 pillars that you want to see. You want privacy, you want self-custody, you want scalability, and you want censorship resistance. And those are these 4 really critical things. And the reason why I say an archway is something that's only locked in from the top. And I think that that's where the relationship between a roll-up or smart contract covenant capabilities, OpCat, comes with the primitives. is I don't actually believe that you build these things linearly. I think what happens is you build things that are fundamentally unstable. And then when you build the keystone technology, it actually locks in the underlying properties that you want the system to have. So that's one of the difficulties of, if you want to say, hey, we want to select what's the best platform to be on, you have to also be cognizant of the impact of being on that platform will have on the platform, which can actually, in many circumstances, destabilize it, and in many circumstances, make it stronger. And I think that the joining of Starknet onto Bitcoin and being able to settle Bitcoin is one of these keystone capabilities, where the example that I gave of, hey, what would a mining pool look like built on Starknet, is a fun one, because that can actually help Bitcoin reinforce its decentralization and censorship resistant capability by increasing the distribution of miners and the lack of custodial mining pools. So I think that that's that's what I would say is any system that you want to be based on should have these aspirations, should be generally seeming to be built in the right way around these. And then the system that you build on top should serve to reinforce what's beneath.
Very interesting. And I think we are dealing with very different visions and approaches, like when settling on both Bitcoin and Ethereum, because Ethereum literally embraced a roll-up centric roadmap that makes everything to make the work for roll-ups easier. And on Bitcoin, it's not the case at all. In fact, I would probably think that the majority of people don't want to see roll-ups on Bitcoin. So we are dealing with a settlement layer that don't want to make our work easier. And on the other hand, Ethereum is embracing the roll-up centric roadmap.
I think generally in the Bitcoin community, we've seen sort of the opposite mentality of, if you build it, they will come. Instead, we've seen, no one's here, let's not build it. And so I think that it's a little bit missing of where Bitcoin doesn't have the smart contract functionality. Bitcoin doesn't have necessarily the on-chain scaling, and right now doesn't really have transaction demand. And so people oftentimes think, well, when there's transaction demand, there'll be more need to build the rollups, and we'll just build it then. But that demand may also not manifest until there's a clear pathway, for that to happen. And similarly, for like rollups, is either might be people pushing it away, but if they understood that it's actually a part of the long-term fundamental capability for Bitcoin to be able to bring in and meet its ultimate goals, like there maybe be a different attitude.
Yeah, definitely. And we see that in discussions, like when talking about OpCat and so on, people are saying, look, the fees are very low, the price is high, so everyone is risk averse and don't want to change anything right now. So it's hard to justify that you need a change to bring scalability when there is no demand currently on the base layer. Yeah. Okay.
I don't have much to add to what Jeremy added, but I do want to suggest that we try to wrap things up. In particular, I have to actually go on another live event very soon. So like,
the meetup in Brussels, right?
Yeah, and I think that if I close here, I may actually shut the whole thing down. So like, but maybe like some ending comments and
yes, we can start to wrap it up. So maybe we can do a quick round and like summarize the key insights from this from those announcements and the discussion we had now. Yeah, we start with Avihu.
What can I say? I mean, I was enjoying the discussion. I'm always happy to hear Jeremy in particular. I feel like very often I learn new things on the technical side of things, but not only. And
his analogies are very good, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I know it's very technical to some people, but I would be very much enjoying, doing another half an hour on that things alone. And I'm also happy to be able to be in 2025 and talk with Vitalik and Dan at the same time on scaling Bitcoin and Ethereum in the same show. Thanks.
Okay, amazing. Dan?
So yeah, for me, I mean, this is a great way to showcase the kind of merging of both communities and to see both, kind of Bitcoin and Ethereum come together here, where Starknet is that glue. Again, I can't understate how bullish at Asymmetric we are about Bitcoin DeFi and about Bitcoin L2s. These are critically important for Bitcoin DeFi to take off. And so I think this is a really important historic moment where Starknet's a really well pedigreed, well-known Ethereum L2, and the fact that they're paying attention to Bitcoin, I think marks a really distinct shift in crypto. And so I think it's a very historic moment today.
Very cool. Jeremy?
Yeah, I think also just thanks for including me. This was actually a lot of fun. And just everyone's got to talk their own book. We're building a lot of really fun technology. So if anyone wants to come work with me, that's kind of our core need right now is people who are eager to build on Bitcoin and sort of write the future of Bitcoin's path.
Amazing. Eli?
Yeah, I actually want to talk about my worries and responsibility. So my biggest worry about Bitcoin is that there's this short window, I feel, before it gets completely ossified by so many forces that will turn it into a Rolex. And I'm really worried by that. So I have this sense of urgency. And I implore the core devs to step up, speak more. I thank you, Jeremy, for doing this. I thank you, Dan, for also speaking up on behalf of these things. Really the biggest fear with so many governments coming and huge institutions actually embracing it, which is good. The biggest fear is that it turns into one big Rolex, and that will be so sad for humanity, because the whole decentralization and freedom aspect will disappear, and I have this very deep sense of urgency. The second thing I want to talk about is responsibility and actions, not words. We came out with an announcement today, but we need to deliver and show concrete things, research and things deployed. But I want to end with a very optimistic note and say, when StarkWare was founded, and I released some of the Stark papers, no one believed that any of that would fly. We did have quite a few believers and investors and so on, but the world at large didn't believe. And now everyone, this is the gold standard. I expect a lot of people will be suspicious and apprehensive about this announcement. And we have to deliver it and work very hard. So StarkWare's 200 plus size team will be doing its part. I invite all developers and all Bitcoin scaling teams to work with us or do it their own path. But there's a huge thing here that is needed for the sake of humanity, of freedom.
Amazing. So I will conclude maybe with my personal feeling. I'm very happy about this expansion to Bitcoin, and I feel for the first time that I don't have to choose between my two loves, because I really love both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And again, for me, they are the only credible attempts to build systems, unstoppable systems that can resist to globally coordinated nation-state attacks. So for me, it's very important, and now we can contribute humbly to both. And something that I really love is the fact that all we do is open source, the research, the code, and so on. So that's why I'm very comfortable to advocate for this technology, because it's greater than all of us and it contributes to the bigger picture. We want to improve and scale both Bitcoin and Ethereum because we want freedom tech to win. And if you don't like us, just take out technology. It's for the common good. It's the public good. So I'm very proud of that aspect. And we did a lot of progress on that front. So thank you, Eli, and all people in StarkWare for taking the right direction. It's super important. Open source is crucial. It's very important. And freedom tech is it's the most important fight for our generation, I would argue. And I'm happy that we are humbly contributing to this important mission. So thank you very much again. It was amazing. I wish we can have another opportunity to discuss much more about those things. So thank you all, and we can wrap it up. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.